A seemingly ordinary day unfolds in Hiroshima. It's 8:15 a.m., August 6, 1945. As people prepare for another day of work, a plane soars through the sky, unaware of the impending disaster. A colossal black object plummets from an altitude of 9,400 meters. In a devastating explosion, just 500 meters above the ground, a fireball ignites with a temperature surpassing the sun, and its radius stretches over 2 kilometers. In an instant, everything within its reach is transformed into nothingness. The blinding light obliterates the sky's color, instantly blinding those who inadvertently gaze upon the blast. Little do they know, an even worse fate awaits them. A wave of heat engulfs the city, generating a scorching wind that boils everything within a radius of over 10 kilometers. Trees turn to ash, flesh peels from bones, and the water in bodies evaporates in an instant. The immense pressure created by the blast and heat produces a shockwave exceeding the speed of sound. Towering structures are reduced to debris, while vehicles become deadly projectiles in the searing downpour. Chemicals released by the explosion adhere to the laws of physics, permeating the air and creating a colossal mushroom cloud. The shattered air generates powerful gusts and vortexes, converging at the epicenter of the blast, carrying dust and smoke to form an immense mushroom-shaped cloud. The returning thermal wave engulfs the central area, where survivors within the 20-kilometer radius encounter death once again. Meanwhile, death continues its relentless journey, spreading devastation far and wide within a 20-kilometer radius. Hiroshima becomes a sea of fire, claiming hundreds of thousands of lives within hours. As the mushroom cloud gradually dissipates, survivors face a grim reality. The fortunate ones, spared from the initial blast, endure hours of agony, awaiting rescue amidst the ruins. Temperatures drop, and discolored clouds release radioactive rain, blanketing the devastated landscape with toxic remnants. Those exposed to this lethal downpour will continue to perish. For those who remain, those who cannot be more fortunate, timely aid in the city's hospitals becomes a distant hope. In the years that follow, the chilling consequences of radiation become apparent as tumors infiltrate their bodies. Yet, the nightmare persists. On August 9, 1945, at 11:01 a.m., another black object descends upon the sky of Nagasaki. A different, yet entirely familiar scene unfolds. The city, devoid of wings, is struck by a bomb even more powerful than Hiroshima. These inhumane attacks claim the lives of approximately 200,000 people, haunting generations to come. The world turned to the United States for answers and accountability, and at the center of these unspeakable acts was a man with eyes bluer than the deepest ocean, Robert Oppenheimer.
Few people laughed. Few people cried. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds."
Born in New York on April 22, 1904, he was the older son of German Jewish immigrants. His father, Julius, was a textile importer who became very wealthy, while his mother was a painter with a family history in New York spanning generations. Robert grew up in Manhattan, on the Upper West Side in an apartment adorned with paintings by famous artists, including Van Gogh. He had a younger brother named Frank Oppenheimer, who would later play a significant role in his life. Despite his fortunate background, Robert experienced a sense of isolation, feeling misunderstood by those around him. His exceptional intelligence and unconventional thinking set him apart from his peers, making it challenging for him to form connections. From an early age, Robert's exceptional mind led him to the field of chemistry, and he pursued studies at Harvard to become a chemist. However, fate had other plans, and he discovered a strong affinity for a different discipline, physics. This attraction began after he took a course on thermodynamics at Harvard. He also studied philosophy, Greek, and French literature. Robert spent his days living in the library, as he put it, intellectually raiding the place. He enrolled at Harvard a year late due to suffering from colitis, an inflammatory bowel disease, but he made up for it by graduating in 3 years instead of 4. He then crossed the pond to the University of Cambridge to conduct research at the Cavendish Laboratory for Experimental Physics. However, he soon realized that his forte was not in experimental work, but rather in theoretical physics. The stress of grad work threw him into depression, and he became emotionally unstable. He even confessed to lacing an apple with harmful chemicals in an attempt to poison his tutor, with whom he didn't get along. Fortunately, the tutor didn't eat the apple. The challenging period of Robert's unsettled mind gradually faded when he made the decision to leave Cambridge behind and join one of the prominent centers for experimental physics at the University of Göttingen in Germany. Despite his youth, he produced good work and held his own. He was only 23 years old when he received his PhD. Subsequently, he returned to the US, where he worked as a researcher fellow at Harvard and later at the California Institute of Technology, Caltech. He was so absorbed in his studies that he often ignored the real world. However, the rise of fascism in Europe in the 1930s caught his attention. It was a time when fascist ideologies were gaining momentum across the continent, and the world was hurtling toward the most devastating days of World War II. As the world buzzed with ideas to create weapons of mass destruction, Oppenheimer was selected in 1942 to direct the Manhattan Project, a top-secret US Army project aimed at developing the atomic bomb. This achievement would ultimately bring him fame, albeit with a name that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The Manhattan Project, the birth of the atomic bomb. Intelligence is a crucial element in times of war. When news reached the White House that Nazi Germany possessed the technology to create devastating weapons of mass destruction, it sent shockwaves through the global political landscape. Germany, renowned for its technological prowess, held the unimaginable power to bring nations to their knees. America watched fearfully as the Nazis invaded Poland in 1939. Faced with the relentless pressure of the most brutal conflict humanity had ever witnessed, the US government initiated a clandestine project with a singular objective: to develop a weapon capable of catapulting America to the forefront of the war, the weapon of mass destruction. In 1942, Oppenheimer was selected to direct the Manhattan Project, a top-secret US Army project to develop the atomic bomb. He brought together the best minds in physics and eventually managed more than 3,000 people. Deliberating on the project's headquarters, Robert turned his gaze towards Los Alamos, New Mexico, a place he had once roamed on horseback during his days of convalescence. Perhaps it was his deep affection for the land, or the desolate landscape that seemed perfectly suited for the cataclysmic power of the atomic bomb. Washington threw ridiculous amounts of money at the project. An initial budget of $6,000 eventually ballooned into a whopping $2 billion by 1945. Although they were not the pioneers of nuclear fusion, Robert and his colleagues managed to transform it into a devastating weapon, serving the purpose of warfare. It was on July 16, 1945, that the inaugural atomic bomb test took place. TRINITY, the atomic bomb test. The first atomic bomb test was conducted in Alamogordo, New Mexico. Robert was unsure of what exactly would transpire. 50 people participated in the test. There were 3 possible outcomes. If the bomb was too colossal, everything would cease to exist. In the second scenario, if it failed to have an effect, everyone would face an unfortunate fate. And in the final and worst case, they would succeed. The test succeeded. The Trinity explosion obliterated all matter within its influential radius. It meant an atomic bomb was ready to be used by the US military. Following the test, the US government realized they held a superior position in the war and used it to promote their reconciliation process with opposing forces. Meanwhile, Oppenheimer and other scientists re-evaluated the issue together. One side hoped that this would be a weapon never actually employed, while the other wished it to be the weapon that could end this excessively violent war. So many lives had been lost. So many worlds had been decimated. Was it worth sacrificing a little more to protect millions of lives in the future? Regardless, the debate among scientists was not a concern for the government. In July 1945, after announcing the atomic bomb to the world, the United States demanded Japan surrender. Japan did not surrender, and what happened thereafter is a story that perhaps does not need to be retold.
One says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that, one way or another.
Dropped one bomb on Hiroshima and destroyed its usefulness to the enemy. It is an atomic bomb. It is a harnessing of the basic power of the universe. The force from which the sun draws its power has been loosed against those who brought war to the Far East.
After the two bombings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Oppenheimer confronted the inhumanity of war and accepted responsibility for his actions. However, accepting responsibility could not undo what had occurred. After some time, Oppenheimer ventured into politics to hinder the government's efforts in industrializing new types of devastating weapons. In 1949, a nuclear bomb was tested in the Soviet Union, much earlier than the US government estimated. This led to Oppenheimer's greatest fear coming true, the resurgence of an arms race. During that period, government officials became aware of a technology that surpassed even the atomic bomb, an idea that had initially sparked from the Manhattan Project, the concept of a hydrogen bomb. Despite Oppenheimer's continuous opposition and refusal to pursue the development of this technology, his concerns were disregarded by those in power. In 1950, the government issued an order to proceed with the development of hydrogen bomb technology. Edward Taylor, a scientist who had worked alongside Oppenheimer in the Manhattan Project's atomic bomb development, accepted the project and took it forward. As a consequence, Edward faced severe backlash and was shunned by the scientific community. During that period, all attention was focused on Oppenheimer, with claims that he was a Soviet spy who indirectly assisted in providing atomic technology to the Soviet Union. The basis for these accusations, which emerged during the 1950s, was the perceived connections Oppenheimer had with communist individuals. Both his wife and former girlfriend were associated with the Communist Party, as were some of his fellow scientists. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, Oppenheimer's dissenting opinions and affiliations led to the revocation of his authority, relegating him from a renowned scientist to a mere teacher. Prominent contemporaries such as Einstein and Wernher von Braun, the pioneer of rocket science, attempted to defend Oppenheimer, but their efforts proved unsuccessful. In later years, when John F. Kennedy assumed the presidency, he expressed a desire to bring Oppenheimer back into the fold of the White House. However, Oppenheimer declined the invitation, choosing to remain outside of the political sphere. In 1965, Robert's life, filled with loneliness and misunderstanding, reached its final chapters. He had been a heavy smoker throughout his lifetime, and unfortunately, he eventually succumbed to throat cancer. It was in 1967 when he took his last breath at his residence in Princeton. He will forever be remembered as the father of the atomic bomb. Fast forward to December 16, 2022, when the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Energy officially dismissed all accusations of espionage against Robert Oppenheimer. The Secretary admitted that the accusations and events of the 1950s were mistakes. Robert Oppenheimer, often seen as a solitary and strange person, was wrongly portrayed as someone who wanted war, even though he actually opposed the arms race. In the end, he was proven right. The responsibility for the casualties of war did not lie with the scientists, but rather with those in positions of power. However, no matter what, even if it meant sacrificing hundreds of thousands of lives, his creation still achieved the desired outcome he aimed for, which was to put an end to an endless war. The Doomsday Clock. The Doomsday Clock was created in 1947 to count down to humanity's potential extinction following the development of nuclear weapons. In 1947, we were 7 minutes to midnight. Today, our remaining time is 100 seconds.